Hey there, it's been a while since we talked last. Sorry I was away for so long. I was working through some shit, but you're still here and I sincerely appreciate that. While I was away, Lisa upped her pledge on Patreon and I could not be more appreciative. I can't say for sure what the future holds, but I'm back and I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. Thanks for sticking around, and thanks for all the loving and supportive messages while I was gone. I'm going to be releasing a companion episode to this on Patreon in a few days as an audio journal to talk a little bit more through where I've been, what I've been going through, and what it took for me to get back. I'm glad to report that I'm doing much better than I have been, and I hope this finds you well. Quick note at the top here, this episode deals with and describes emotional abuse, so take care of yourselves, friends. My name is Callie Wright, and this is Queersplaining. I have a problem with directions sometimes. I don't really understand why, but sometimes I have trouble remembering which exit to take from the highway, even if it's the same place I've been to a dozen or more times, and I feel like a jackass every time. The hair stands on the back of my neck, my heartbeat jumps, my blood pressure probably does too. I start questioning my intelligence and my self-worth. I kick myself for being such a millennial, so helplessly dependent on my GPS, regardless of how often I've been to this place before. And after it all settles down, after I get to where I'm going and swear to myself I'm not going to forget that particular set of directions ever again, I start thinking, Jesus Christ, Callie, that was sort of the textbook definition of an overreaction, my friend. It makes sense to be annoyed at yourself, maybe, for forgetting something you should know, but you understand your worth as a human being doesn't depend on you remembering directions, right? And then I remember why I feel this way. My ex hated driving, so I drove everywhere. We usually took her car because it was cooler than mine. She was the one with the fancy healthcare job who made twice as much as me, I being the lowly audio-video systems installer.
What's wrong with you? Why do you miss this exit every single time? Why are you driving in this lane? Why did you turn left here instead of there? Did this bag of chips come from the bottom of the grocery store shelf, and was it the bag behind the bag in front? Did the dogs get a total of 5 treats at 8:30 a.m. just before you left? Did you fill the food and water bowls to the exact line?
I remember getting a stress headache when I heard her car pull into the driveway of the house we bought together. I'd jump up and take a quick lap around the house to make sure everything was in order. I'd pull up text messages and scroll furiously to make sure there was no reminder or request that I'd missed. The door opened. I cringed. There was about a 5-second window in which, if I heard my name, there would be problems.
Fuck, hang on a second. Did I use the wrong cycle on the washer when I did her laundry? Can I sneak downstairs before she does?
It took me years to figure it out, but I was the victim of emotional abuse. I was a victim of emotional abuse. I've always had a tenuous relationship with self-esteem. There are some ways in which I'll totally cop to just being downright arrogant, right? But there are also ways in which I find myself thinking I'm completely worthless. And these feelings tend to exist on a spectrum, as most things do. My real struggles with my self-esteem started just around the time my issues with my gender identity started to surface. There seemed to be a direct correlation between these two things, so I didn't question it very hard at first. At that point, I was embarking on a journey into the unknown, finally able to explore a side of myself I'd always hidden before. It seemed only natural to me to ask questions about my self-worth. It made perfect sense to me to question whether or not I was even capable, read good enough, of pulling off this coming out and transitioning thing. Every failure seemed justified because I didn't think I was smart enough or good enough or capable enough, or that I was worthy of having the happiness and joy I'd seen this transition bring to others. As I settled into life after coming out, those feelings didn't go away. I felt very sure of who I was. I'd spent more time than I care to recall exploring my identity, figuring out who I was. This wasn't just some run-of-the-mill, everyday self-doubt. I'd successfully made it through my social transition, had my legal transition well underway, and was working towards getting things in order with work so I could transition there. I'd accomplished so much and came so far. Why was I doubting myself so hard? Why did my failures all make perfect sense to me when I was shocked by my successes? Why did I find it so incredibly hard to believe it when anyone said something nice about me? It was not too long into this process, I read an article that helped me figure out the answers to these questions. And I searched over and over again, trying to find this article again, and I couldn't. The title was something akin to How I Became an Abuser and Didn't Realize It. The story was of a woman who'd become emotionally abusive to her husband, then recognized what she had done, worked to make it right, and she was sharing her experience with others as a caution for them to not do the same thing. She gave an example that hit me square in the chest. She was the one who did most of the cooking in the house. One night she wasn't feeling well and sent her husband out to get some ground beef. And her husband came back with the wrong kind, and she found herself berating him for it. She would say things like, "Why can't I ever trust you to do simple things? Why can't you ever remember what I tell you? What's wrong with you?" And the like. And I felt a creeping sense of realization. I didn't realize this as it was happening, but I really did start to internalize the things my ex said to me. I asked myself constantly, my God, what is wrong with me? Why can't I even remember to do these simple things? I'm just a horrible partner, I guess. I started to believe those things about myself. It was more or less a coincidence that the downfall of my relationship to this person happened as I began to struggle more and more with my gender, which made it easy for me to pin these things on my gender identity instead of my abusive relationship. Like a lot of people, I didn't see it when I was in the situation. And I really did make mistakes, plenty of them. I was thoughtless and careless sometimes, and sometimes my ex was angry at me in ways that were justified. I'm no saint, nor have I ever been or claimed to be. But there are no mistakes that justify robbing someone of their self-worth. Once I figured this out, suddenly so many things made sense. I believed that I was clumsy, unintelligent, forgetful to the point where my worth and my usefulness as a person was suspect. I would get nervous about performing everyday tasks for the fear of the verbal shellacking I was going to get if I didn't do it exactly right. All of the joy was sucked out of so many everyday things. And abuse, like any other human experience, resides on a spectrum. There are some people whose experiences have very few lasting consequences for their day-to-day lives, and there are some for whom their experience is debilitating. There's an entire spectrum of experience between these extremes, and we as a society need to come to terms with that. For my part, if we're discussing the consequences, I'd have to say the lasting effects fall at like a 3 or a 4 out of 10, if 10 is the worst it could be. I'm not interested in taking up spaces meant for survivors of abusive trauma because I don't think I would use the word trauma to describe what I've been through. Baggage is probably a more appropriate word. But it certainly does have lasting consequences for my self-worth, my self-esteem, and my confidence. My relationship with my wife hasn't escaped these consequences. We have, by all measures, an extremely healthy relationship, but I also tend to fixate so hard on how healthy our relationship is, and I borderline obsess over the fact that I may lose it somehow, and that's something I'm still working through. I think my story is an important illustration of the fact that sometimes abuse isn't overt. Not all abusers are monstrous caricatures. I'm positive the person who did these things to me didn't intend the consequences of their actions. None of that changes the effect it's had on me, though. If you're hurting because something like this happened to you, please don't think that you weren't hurt enough to be affected. Please don't wonder if your experience is worth talking about. If you want to support the show and help me keep telling my stories and the stories of queer and trans people, check out patreon.com/queersplaining and consider a donation to support the show. If you already do, I couldn't do this without you. Thank you. You can search Queersplaining on Twitter and Facebook to find us there, and I'm at Callie Gets It on Twitter and Instagram. Before I go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friend, my name is Callie Wright, and this is Queersplaining.